Minimum wage living. That stuff is for the birds. Clocking in at some half-filthy fast food restaurant or unloading truckloads of cheap junk into a big box store. Hauling a metric ton of stacked shingles up a rickety ladder in the July heat. Backbreaking labor for the uneducated or a recently released felon. I was both. After a 7-year stretch in one of these state's most charming maximum security prisons, I found myself desperate for work. As a high school dropout with a list of petty theft and robbery convictions, I managed to shorten my 10-year sentence with good behavior, but I was still stuck with finding bona fide employment. Those are the words of the Department of Corrections, not mine. And they barely pay me anything to babysit you and watch you pee in a cup every week. Gene Hoskins had said. He was my probation officer and was supposed to help me find a decent gig, but let me know early on that he wasn't going to be much help. You want work? Hit the unemployment office. I played the game though. Got a little part-time job at a mom-and-pop grocery store in my old neighborhood, Dabbenditos. The place was an institution in my neck of the woods. Old man Dabendito and his wife were so old that they probably babysat Jesus, but they were still alive and kicking when I got released and were kind enough to give me 20 hours a week, sweeping up and running the register. Pay wasn't great, but it kept Hoskins off my butt most of the time. My old man used to take me to the very same shop after school to get a soda, and he would buy one of those scratch-off lotto tickets. We did that every day until he got tossed into the slammer himself. Petty theft and robbery, just like his boy. You see, me and my pop come from a long line of crappy criminals. Our heart was in it, but our skills never matched up. Every man in the family did time as far back as my great-grandfather, so far as I'm aware. Ain't got no guardian angels in this family, Polly. My old man told me when Ma and I came and saw him every other week in prison. Ain't nobody watching out for you but you. At least my luck was better than my dad's. My stint wasn't too bad. Got a job in the commissary, so the other cons tended to like me. Fellas wanted to enjoy staying on the good side of the guy who brought them their snacks and toiletries. I kept my head down and my nose clean, at least as far as the guards were concerned. A little bit of pot or hooch here and there got a blind eye when you stayed quiet. Passed the time too. My dad though, no, not so lucky. Pete Haville was a little man with a big mouth. Got fleeced at a game of cards and lost a few more smokes than he thought was fair. Gave a fella a bit too much lip and got a sharpened toothbrush handle hammered through his eyeball. Ma didn't mind too much though. When he died, the government sent a tidy little Social Security insurance check to the house each month. More than he ever did, she would say, and she was right. And Pop was too though, no guardian angels for this family. The Dabbenditos treated me pretty good though, at least 20 hours a week like I said, more if I wanted them. They were old and staying on their feet all day in the little bodega was a lot for them. I would usually pick up an extra 10 hours or so and sometimes a full work week. Things would have been a lot better if I had stuck with that, but it didn't last for long. Things took a turn when my old pal Tony popped back into my life. "Who's this sad sack of crap?" I heard a familiar voice say from over my shoulder. My head was craned into the cooler, pulling gallons of milk to the front. I recognized the nasally tone. Turning towards the voice, I smiled. "Oh, I knew it was you, Paulie Haville." It was Tony all right, but he didn't look like I had remembered. We had been pals since second grade and he had always been an ox of a kid. Almost 6 feet by the end of 8th grade, and he shot up another half foot before I dropped out my sophomore year. The boy had been a slab of muscle and was built like a brick house, but the guy that stood in front of me looked like a scarecrow. If it wasn't for the black, slicked back hair and shark's grin, I may not have recognized him. "Tony Tennant," I bellowed. "How you been?" "Oh, better than you, jailbird. Some of the boys from the good old days told me that you got picked up a while back. Surprised to see you were here keeping shop for Mr. and Mrs. D. Smells like parole requirements for me. Hard for a man to make a decent living with a PO breathing down his back." We laughed and gave each other a back-slapping hug before slipping through the front door and lighting up a couple of smokes. Tony jabbered on about some of our old acquaintances and the various prisons that they were currently cooling in. I threw back a handful of inflated jail stories myself, and he listened and laughed, coughing violently on occasion as plumes of cigarette smoke spilled from his nostrils. "You ain't looking so good, Tony," I said, crushing my cigarette beneath my heel. "I've never seen you this thin. You all right?" "Never better, Polly," he said with a smile. A thin circle of blood rimmed his wide nostrils. He dabbed it with his coat sleeve. "Doing real well, as a matter of fact. Been on a bit of a winning streak. May want to get you in on it." I smiled in response, but there was something hollow in his words. The man looked like he was in the late stages of cancer or some other terminal illness. His skin was ashen. All of his bones seemed to be trying to rip out of his skin, and his teeth had gone the worst shade of yellow that I had ever seen. His hair, which looked black from a distance, was heavily peppered with gray streaks. "If I know you, may not be the kind of winning streak that I need to be on. Seems like you and I were in the same line of work, but that ended with me heading upstate for dang near a decade, my man. I can't go back. You enjoy that winning streak, Tony. I'm gonna stick to stocking shelves here instead of another decade of passing out prison commissary." It's foolproof, Polly. Tony's eyes locked on mine with an intensity that I had never seen before. They looked like predators' eyes focusing on some poor critter, with its head in the grass and butt in the wind. "Meet me at Mauer Park tonight at midnight and I'll clue you in. You ain't one to skip out on easy money if I remember." Tony, you had all the luck, but I came up with the short end of the stick. I gestured to the bodega behind me. "I'm gonna make this work here." "Look, I'm just saying, Polly," he responded. "You can spend the next few years wasting away mopping floors and slinging cigarettes to the nobodies wandering around here. You're gonna die broke and frustrated. What I'm offering you is money, big money, and it's safe too. Mauer Park, tonight at midnight. If you don't show up, I get it. Just mop floors and sling cigarettes." He turned and headed down the block without another word. For a moment, I thought to yell at him and tell him that it was past my curfew. My PO could check in on me at any time and I would be back upstate in a thin bunk mattress trying to ignore the nighttime screams on the cell block. I didn't though, but I wish I had. I turned the lockpick over in my hand beneath the streetlight. It looked simple and unimpressive. The only difference I could see was the sharp spike at the end of the handle. I had owned at least half a dozen through the years and never had much luck with them. Breaking a window had always been easier, but I guess that's how I ended up locked away in the first place. Speed was never a replacement for caution, but I had never been able to stick with that line of thought. "Tony, what the heck am I supposed to do with this?" I said, feeling upset. "You told me that you had a foolproof gig for us, but you just brought me here to give me a lockpick." "It ain't just a lockpick," Tony said with a smile. His yellowing teeth looked like sulfur in the streetlights. "That thing will pick any lock that you put it in. I guarantee it." I call BS. I spat and pushed the pick back toward him. "I don't need to get caught with this garbage anyway. My parole officer can smell the problem a mile away. He brags about sending guys back to the pen all the time. Guy would love it if he popped in for a visit and saw this little beauty sitting on my kitchen table." "What have you got to lose, Polly? They got you working part-time at a bodega just to stay out of prison. You can't use a little more cash in those pockets. I'm just trying to help a friend out." Tony paced, seeming agitated that I hadn't accepted the pick like a godsend. He muttered under his breath as he walked a tight circle. I was getting ready to drop it on the ground and head home when he finally stopped and faced me. "If it don't work on your first try, I'll give you $1,000, honest to God. There's an abandoned house just on the other side of the park. You go over there and try it now on the front door. If the lock don't pop, you get $1,000 from me first thing tomorrow. What do you say?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. He beckoned me out of the streetlight and I followed him down the narrow gravel trail through the park. The park was a generous term for the tiny patch of grass and withering trees in the middle of the city, but it was as close as you got living in the center of a major metro area. The sound of sirens from miles away drifted through the calm night air while my head scanned side to side looking for any signs of life. "There it is," Tony said, pointing to a solitary row house across the street. It was surrounded on both sides by the crumpled remains of burned-out buildings. I could remember the houses from when I was a kid. All painted bright colors, stoops always littered with kids wasting away on summer afternoons. It sent a chill down my spine to see the block had burned down while I was locked up. Somehow it had left the single house standing, its color faded and covered with soot. "And test the handle first so you know that I'm not fooling you. It's locked tight. That little pick will open it up like a hot knife through butter, Polly." I tried to reply, but my throat was parched and scratchy. It always got that way when I was nervous. Scanning down both sides of the street, I searched again for prying eyes. I expected to see some kid out sneaking a smoke or some old lady walking her dog, but the streets were empty. Nothing but me, Tony, and the ruined old house across the street. My footsteps were audible as I made my way toward the house. There were only 2 steps leading up to the concrete slab of the stoop and nothing to block the view on either side, so I sank to one knee and examined the lock. Gripping the knob, I turned it in both directions, but the door didn't budge. It was locked, just like Tony said it would be. After a final test, I decided to give the pick a try. Pulling it from my pocket, I examined it again. The tooling on the end looked too large to slide in the lock, but Tony had seemed so sure that it would work that I wanted to give it a try before I went back to tell him how full of crap he had been. I pushed the end of the pick to the lock and tried to push it in, but it met resistance almost immediately. The tooled end was flexing and bending like it was trying to make its way in, so I decided to give it a little bit more force. Holding it tightly, I pushed the pick harder against the lock. My hand was sweaty and began to slide down the shaft of the tool when the tiny spike in the end bit into my hand. I winced in pain and was preparing to pull the pick back out when it slid gracefully into the tumbler. Without even wiggling the thing once, the lock clicked and the door popped open. "Like a hot knife through butter," Tony had said. He was right. It hadn't taken any effort after I had applied a bit more force, but the spot that the end of the pick left in my hand throbbed like a bee sting. I looked at my hand expecting to see blood, but to my response, there was only a tiny hole, raw and pink. "The dang thing works, Tony," I said in a low voice, "but that spike at the end bit into my hand. Why didn't you file this thing off?" There was no answer. I pulled the pick from the lock and slid it back into my pocket before standing up. Once I had safely stashed it away, I turned around to find Tony, but there was no one there. The street was completely empty. The sirens that had been far off in the distance seemed much closer than they had been when I had first approached the house. Looking down the street, I could see the first sign of strobing red and blue lights bouncing off the wall of one of the burnt-out houses. My heart began to beat quickly as I realized in just moments a cop would see me standing on the stoop with a lockpick in my possession. It wasn't illegal to own one per se, but any cop with half a brain could string it together that an open door in an abandoned property probably met that pick at some point. I was just getting ready to run to the other end of the street when the same dull flickers painted the walls of the apartment building across the street. "Go into the house," a silky voice said from somewhere nearby. I jumped and spun around, but there was still no one in sight. The lights on the police cars were getting brighter, the sirens nearly deafening. "This is a setup courtesy of your ne'er-do-well friend Anthony Tennant. He has contacted the authorities who will find you in mere moments if you do not go inside. Do you understand me? If I go in, I'm cornered," I shouted to the disembodied voice. All logic and reason had fled my mind under the deafening roar of sirens. "I gotta make a break for it." "Go into the house, you fool," the voice demanded. Mind-numbing pain erupted from my palm where the pick had broken my skin, and I fell to one knee, clutching my hand to my chest. "We have work to do, and if you aren't able to follow my simple directions, I'll be forced to find another vessel." "Vessel?" I questioned, panting and reeling from the pain in my hand. "What is happening?" "Mr. Haville," crooned the voice. My hand screamed with pain again, and I thought that I would vomit or pass out soon if the wave of agony didn't go away. I'm usually more in favor of the carrot than the stick, but if you do not go inside that house, I'm afraid the discomfort that you're currently feeling is only a trickle of what I'm capable of providing. My hand felt like I had stuck the thing in a blender. Looking down at it, I could see that the hole was still no more than a small, dry opening in my palm. From the corners of my eyes, the glint of headlights rounding the corner at the end of the block and turning in my direction sent my pulse racing. With no other choice, I stepped inside the abandoned house. The door slammed behind me and I heard the deadbolt slide in place with a dull crack. "Up the stairs, Mr. Haville. I've taken the liberty of locking the door behind us. My connection to the lock will not remain long and I will not be able to keep the inquisitive officers from gaining entry. There is a doorway immediately to the right when you reach the second floor. Go inside and look through the window. Once you see the patrol vehicle pull out of sight, open the window and move slowly down the fire escape. Walk 3 blocks in the direction of your boarding house. There will be a police officer on the way who will stop us, but I shall handle that." I opened my mouth to question the voice and to argue in favor of just hiding out until the cops left, but the white-hot pain in my palm made my jaw clench. As quietly as I could, I stared to pad up the stairs to the landing and fiddled with the knob to the door on the right. The frame was warped with age and bowed out from water damage, so I threw my shoulder into it, sending the door arching quickly and smacking against the wall. I winced at the noise, afraid the officers outside may have heard me, but it seemed unlikely over the sound of sirens. There was a single window in the dusty bedroom covered by a yellowing sheet. The smell of mildew and rot was so thick that I could have cut it like a loaf of bread. It was hard to breathe the stagnant air, so I pulled my t-shirt over my mouth. The bright lights of a police car was strobing in the darkness, piercing the dry, rotted cloth on the window. It milled slowly down the street, the spotlight sweeping from side to side as they looked for signs of intruders. After scanning the alleyway behind the house, the engine revved and it moved quickly out of sight. "Now, the window of escape is short and time is of the essence, Mr. Haville." The cloth fell apart in my hand as I pulled it from the window. There was a dull squeal as I thumbed the rusted window locks open and lifted the bottom pane into the frame into the track above. Looking out the fire escape, it had seen better days. Rust, cobwebs, and garbage were strewn all over, and there was a section near the end that had been eaten away, leaving a gaping hole leading to the ground 2 stories below. "Oh man," I said aloud, "this thing isn't going to hold me." "It'll hold, but you have to move now, Mr. Haville. The officers are almost through the door, and once they set foot on the stairs, your chance will be gone." Ducking my head and lifting a leg, I straddled the window frame and planted a foot on the metal grating outside. It creaked and bowed beneath me as I shifted my weight onto the landing, but it managed to hold together. I inched toward the railing and stepped over the hole in the mesh, vision blurring as I looked out at the drop below. Metal buckled and popped as I placed my hands on the ladder and made my way down. I made contact with the concrete below and bellowed a sigh of relief. Through the open window of the abandoned house, I heard a loud bang in the voice of 2 police officers asking anyone inside to identify themselves. Their loud footsteps going up the stairs rang out in the alleyway, and I made a break for the street, running as hard as I could. "I told you to walk, you simpleton." "There are 2 cops behind me. You want me to saunter off like I'm heading to the boardwalk? You gotta be crazy." "Mr. Haville, Walker, I'll be forced to hurt you. Have I led you astray thus far?" "No, but I gotta." The pain in the palm erupted again and my knees buckled. I fell hard, my face scraping against the concrete, and the feeling of hot blood spread across my skin. My whole body ached like I had the flu, and I rolled onto my back. The sound of the pursuing police was washed over by a ringing in my ears. The pressure in my head was building to a crescendo, and I felt like my temples were going to pop. Up, walk, slowly. I had so hoped you would be a bit more intelligent than Mr. Tennant, but I see that my hopes were all for naught. My head felt clear again, and the pain in the rest of my body drifted away, leaving only the sharp sting from the scrape on the side of my face. My feet stumbled to life, and I walked slowly, dabbing at my cheek and pulling my hand away to see fresh blood under the streetlights. I brushed at the wound again, knocking away dirt and a small rock that had dug into my skin. "Take a left at the end of the alley and walk 3 blocks. The police officer that I spoke of will be standing on the corner. When he sees you, do not attempt to flee. I will get us out of this." "Who the heck are you, man?" "Be quiet and walk, you fool. We will have endless time to speak when we are in the safe confines of your boarding house. I ain't doing anything else unless you tell me who you are or what you are. I don't know why I'm even talking to you. One of my screws is loose and I'm losing my mind. I assure you that while you are not mentally ill, you are not an ideal vessel. I am a passenger with a noisy means of conveyance at the moment. Now shut your mouth. The officer is just ahead and I will need to attend to him." I could see them just ahead, standing in the dull glow of a flickering streetlight. The tail end of a police cruiser poked out from the side of a house, and the officer was leaning against it, looking down at his cell phone. My throat felt dry and I began to slow my pace for a moment, but a small throb of pain in my palm spurred me forward. A rock skipped down the sidewalk, knocked away by my foot. It caught his attention immediately. "Hey!" he shouted and started walking in my direction. I saw him unclip the holster of his gun and rest his palm on the butt of the pistol. "Come on over here nice and slow, sir. A little bit late to be out for a stroll, don't you think?" "My apologies, officer," my voice said through my mouth. My heart hammered against my chest. I tried to stop walking, but I no longer had control of my body. "My vehicle is not currently in an operable state, and I was forced to take the pedestrian route to my place of employment." "Why are you talking like that, huh?" the cop asked, his body tensing. "Why don't you stop right where you are and show me some ID? Get it out real slow, no surprises, you hear?" My body stopped and I could feel my left arm rise slowly in the air, and the right slipped behind me to fish my wallet from my back pocket. My hand rested on the dull leather and froze. Sweat was beading on my forehead, not out of nervousness but from a sudden rise in body temperature. Suddenly I felt like I had the worst cold of my life. My body was covered in perspiration and my shirt was clinging to my chest. "Unless you want me to get nervous, you better get that ID," the cop said again. His hand was wrapping around the handle of the gun. If I had had control over my body, I would have pissed my pants. Mr. Haville, I'm going to need you to go to sleep for a brief period. We will talk after I have completed my interaction with this man. I shall get us back to your abode. Who you talking to, freak show? The cop said, and everything went black. I woke up in my bed, head throbbing and my throat dry as paper. My tongue felt fuzzy like it did on nights when I had a few too many shots of whiskey. My bedside clock read 4:32 a.m. and I couldn't remember how I had gotten home. I mean, the whole night seemed like a blur. My head throbbed and a dull ache pulsed from my palm into my upper arm. Sweat covered my body, making my shirt cling uncomfortably to my chest. I felt like I had the highest temperature of my life. I let out a deep sigh of relief, happily realizing the night's events had all been a fever dream. There was a bottle of off-brand NyQuil in my medicine cabinet, and I kicked my legs over the side of my bed. The cheap linoleum floor felt cold and soothing under my sweaty feet as I walked on unsteady legs towards the bathroom. I turned the corner of my bed when I saw something in the darkness of my bedroom. 2 red eyes burning like embers in the darkness. "Good morning, Mr. Haville," said a low and calm voice. "I was beginning to think you would sleep until daylight. Such a dreadful time with all that sunlight." I panicked and tried to run, but the dull ache in my palm spread through my entire body and I crumpled to the floor. The muscles in my jaw flexed and seized as I opened my mouth to scream, but no noise would come out. Sweat beaded onto my skin and pooled in my eyes, but no matter how hard I fought, I could not close them. It felt like someone was holding a cigarette lighter to them. If you are not able to act as though you have a bit more common sense, this relationship is going to be very painful indeed. I'm going to allow you to stand up now, but you will return to the edge of your bed and have a seat. If you again attempt to flee, you will find that your current predicament is not the full extent of my authority over you. The wave of agony went away and I pushed myself up from the floor, weak and unbalanced. I fell backward onto the bed, the cheap springs bouncing and creaking. Smells of heat and rotten eggs filled my nose and my stomach turned. I stared in fear at the glowing eyes in the corner. "You're not real," I muttered. "I'm sick and you're just something my brain has cooked up. I need to see a doctor." "I am quite real, Mr. Haville. You are not the first to wish that I was some figment of their imagination." "Let me see you then," I said. The words came out like those of a whimpering child. "Are you certain that is what you want? While I am happy to oblige, you may not like what you see." "I'm sure," I said, feeling more certain of myself than I had in a few moments before. The sweat was pouring down my face. The voice had to be hallucination. "You're nothing but some fever dream. Once my temperature drops, you'll be gone." "If you insist." Every light in the room turned on at once, washing out my vision like the brightness of the morning sun. My eyes struggled to adjust and I could make out a figure sitting in the ratty old chair in the corner. Nothing more than a brilliant orange blob at first. But when my vision came into focus, my heart skipped a beat. My father sat in the chair, elbows propped on the armrest, wearing a blood-covered prison jumpsuit. He smiled at me. His thin, oily hair was combed back over his scalp, making his head shine under the abrasive light. The end of a white toothbrush poked out of his left eye socket, liquid dripping from the wound. His other eye had the milky white sheen of a cataract, but I could feel it locked onto me. "Paulie," he exclaimed. "My boy, look at ya. Gotta be at least a foot taller than your old man. Come and give me a hug, kid. I missed ya. It's awful lonely in that cheap pine box. Nothing but the maggots to keep me company." I jumped up dizzy and ran for the door. My hand gripped the knob and I turned it frantically, but it only rattled in place. The chair behind me groaned as my father stood up and started padding across the floor. My fists beat against the door and I screamed for help, but only hoarse whispers came out and the violent hammering on the wood seemed like nothing more than soft taps. "Oh, sorry about the smell, Polly," my father's voice said softly. "After old Monty Blanton shoved that shank in my eye, it seems like my bowels didn't hold up so well. Died covered in my own filth, my boy." "You're not my father," I croaked, turning to look at the thing creeping up behind me. "You ain't him. What are you?" Peter Haville stopped a foot away from me and reached out a hand, caressing the side of my face. The stink of rot and feces surrounded me, making my eyes water. The touch of his hand was cold and clammy. A chill crawled down my spine as his sickening soft hands ran over my cheek. "I ain't no guardian angel," he said soothingly. "That's for sure. I told you before, my boy. Ain't no guardian angels in this family, but I'll take care of you." The lights faded away again and I collapsed on the floor, sobbing and retching. A police siren screamed by the open window, making me jump like a frightened kid. My stomach was beginning to settle as the smells of decay had faded a little. "You don't seem to have enjoyed seeing me, Mr. Haville. I confess, while I did enjoy watching your state of fear and agony, I tried to warn you. I lack a true physical form, so however I present, it is always something most unpleasant. As a service to my avatar, I do my best to remain out of sight." "I don't want this," I muttered over and over. "Please, for the love of God, leave me alone." "Oh, I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. Haville. You see, I'm in need of a permanent vessel, lest I become trapped in that thieves' tool for the remainder of time. I have tasted your blood and soul, and we are bound for now. Perhaps you will be my permanent sanctuary, but there are some rules that I'm bound to share with you. Have a seat, Avatar, and listen." I remember going to Sunday Mass when I was a kid. Mom would drag me to the Catholic church down on Maple Street every Sunday. I would sit in the dark, echoing sanctuary and listen to the priest tell me 1,000 ways that I would go to hell if I didn't mind my P's and Q's. But for some reason, only one verse stuck in my mind. Matthew 6:34. "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." That was the first time I was introduced to the concept that money was the root of all evil. It seemed stupid to me as a kid. I would see these fat cats rolling around town in fancy cars, eating in nice restaurants, and walking around with beautiful women on their arms. It looked like money brought a lot of happiness. Not for me. The year after Tony gave me that infernal lockpick was the most prosperous of my life. I pulled off break-ins that no man had any business walking away from. Bank teller drawers, jewelry stores, ATMs. Nothing was out of reach. I would just slide the pick into my pocket and tell the voice what I wanted, and then I would black out. When I woke up again, I was in a little rented room, a pile of cash or jewelry on the bed. No memory of how I had gotten them, but I knew the voice in the pick took care of it. "Tell me what you want, Mr. Haville, and it will all be yours," the voice told me the first night. "But it comes with a price. I will bring you all of the riches and comfort that you desire, but it will cost a piece of your soul. Each time I taste your blood, I take a sliver of your essence. Delve too deeply and I will own all of you." That's what had happened to Tony, the voice explained. He had used the key too many times and his soul got thin. 1 or 2 more jobs and the voice and the pick would have taken over his body for good. And Tony had almost pressed his luck too far. But there was a catch. "I am bound to tell you that if you pass the pick on to another before I consume the last of you, you will no longer be bound as my thrall. The portions of your soul that I have collected shall not return, but you will avoid paying the ultimate price. I am trapped, and the thief's tool, and as such, must be passed on to another thief. This is likely why Mr. Tennant chose you." "I just won't use the pick," I said. "I'll just toss you and your little prison into a drawer and forget about you." "Well, that is certainly an option, Mr. Haville," the voice said with a low chuckle. "But you will begin to unravel at the seams. It will be slow at first. Your health will begin to fade. Perhaps you can manage that, though. My voice, however, no, it will drive you mad. No matter how far away you're from the pick, you'll hear me whispering in your ear day and night. There will be no peace, and if you don't use the pick, I do not feed. I will take your sanity or your soul. The choice is yours." I tried calling the thing's bluff. I tossed that lockpick in a kitchen drawer and didn't open it for nearly a month. Everything went fine for a while too. I spent my days sweeping up and stocking shelves at the bodega. Spent my nights reading old paperbacks and watching DVDs from the public library. And then the tremors started. They were minor at first, barely noticeable. I would be standing outside the shop, smoking a cigarette and watching the ember trembling in the dark. I thought it might be a side effect of my increasing lack of sleep, but it only got worse as the days went on. I could barely hold the mop as I cleaned up at the end of the night. Cans fell from my hand as I restocked the shelves. Change scattered from my hands when I would ring up a customer. It got so bad that Mr. D gave me a few days off of work, telling me to go see a doctor and to get some rest. Not that I could afford a doctor. I could barely afford the crappy flop house room that I rented. As I lay in bed that night, body shaking and eyes clenched, that's when the whispering began. "This is what I warned you about." I rolled over, pulling the blanket over my head tightly. "All you have to do is take me out of the drawer and put me to work." I tossed again, kicking the covers off as my body shook violently. "Tell me what you want, Mr. Haville. Money, jewels, treasures. You can have anything your heart desires. Just hold the pick and give me control." I don't know how many hours I rolled and thrashed in the bed, but eventually, I gave in and pulled the lockpick from the drawer, gripping it in my shaking hand. As soon as the pointed end bit into the flesh of my palm, my body calmed and I felt calm again. A sigh of relief escaped my mouth. "Let's just do something small," I said reluctantly. "Just some little job. A few bucks to buy some groceries, nothing major. Don't go hurting anyone, okay?" "Close your eyes, Mr. Haville," the voice said soothingly. "When you awake, all will be as you've asked." Just like it said, I woke up the next morning. The sun was piercing through the cheap window blinds and the rays of light danced over a pile of crumpled bills on the pillow beside me. The 20s, 50s, and $100 bills scattered from the bed as I jolted up. I scooped the cash up and started counting, and nearly started to cry when I had finished. It was over $1,200. I couldn't believe the last time I had that much money in my hands. It was enough to cover my expenses for the next month, with a few hundred left over. I folded in and slid it into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the metal pick inside. I shuddered, suddenly wondering what the thing had done to get the money, wondering where it had come from, worried that whoever it had been taken from may actually have needed it. I went to the bathroom to wash my face. As I looked into the mirror, I saw the slightest trace of crow's feet in the corners of my eyes, and a sprinkle of gray in my dark hair. I couldn't remember noticing them before. It was as if they sprang up overnight. I went a little overboard at first, taking more cash than I needed, but I slowed down when it seemed like using the pick was making me feel a little dog-eared. so I started using the pick sparingly, just enough cash to supplement my pay from working at the bodega. Most of the money went into a cigar box that I kept on top of the fridge. No way that I could put it into a bank. I may not be a genius, but the authorities probably keep an eye on cash going into bank accounts that seem to come from nowhere. I just wanted to save up a couple $1,000 and then I would pass on the pick to some other unsuspecting victim. Ma got sick a few weeks later. Lady cancer, she said. Her doctor gave her a decent outlook on recovery, but the chemo and radiation were vicious. She had worked as a night shift cleaning lady in an office building downtown for as long as I remembered. But as she got weaker, she had to cut back her hours until she wasn't working at all. It wasn't long before I was keeping her afloat. She was hesitant at first to take the money, worried about where I had gotten it. But she believed the thin lies about the extra hours that I was picking up at the bodega. At first, I took the cash directly to her, but she was getting concerned with how shabby I looked. "You've aged a decade, Polly," she would say, bony hand caressing my face. "When did you get all those gray hairs and wrinkles?" I tried to laugh it off and told her that working like an honest man wore me down to the bone, but she needled me about it. Thought that I might be doing drugs or had cancer myself. When I tried to change the subject, she would always manage to shift it back. It's not like I could tell her about the lockpick and the demonic hitchhiker in my body, so I did the only thing that I could think of. I stopped visiting. I would just slip cash under her door in an envelope every week. Mom wasn't wrong about my looks though. The lines in my face were getting deeper every day, and my once black hair was almost a field of gray. Only a few strands of black remained. My head was starting to slump forward like a vulture, and I was skinnier by the week. I never felt sick really, but I never felt healthy either. I was starting to look like Tony did the last time that I saw him. Tony, I couldn't believe him. He had been near the end of his ride with the pick and found a way out, and he passed it on to me. You can't blame a guy for wanting to live. But as I fell deeper and deeper under the weight of the voice inside the pick, I grew angrier with him for giving it to me. He was one of my oldest friends, and I couldn't understand why he would have done it to someone who was close to him. But I guessed that I could understand. I was desperate and trusting. He looked like he was near the end when I saw him. I'm not sure that he had me in mind. Just saw me at the store that day and knew that I would trust him. If he had given the pick to someone random and it hadn't bit into their flesh, maybe they would have just thrown it away, still bound to him, left to drive him mad. I still hated him for it. My body felt like it may give out at any time, and I knew that I had used the pick too often. Never heard the voice anymore, just held it in my pocket and let the spike bite into my palm as I whispered what I needed. Never anything huge. Just a few bucks to get through, something small, something I hoped wouldn't take away too much of my soul, and just to give Ma enough to get by. I never took her calls anymore, but she would always leave me a voicemail. Her voice sounded stronger every time that I listened to the messages. She kept me up to date on her treatment and said that she was feeling better, thanked me for the money too, but she always sounded uncomfortable about that. She danced around where she thought it came from until her last call. I kept working at the shop a few times a week to keep my parole officer off my butt, and usually I kept my phone on silent. At the end of the night after I locked up, I would light a smoke and pull my cell phone from my pocket, turning the ringer back on and checking my messages, as few as there were. Ma's number and a voicemail notification flashed on the screen, and so I hit the button and held the phone to my ear. "Hey baby, it's your Ma. Look, I'm feeling a little better and I'm gonna be going back to work next week. I can't take any more money from you, Polly. You're a sweet boy for taking care of me, but I'm worried about how you're getting on. Maybe you're working hard, and I hope so. But you always had a lot of your dad in you. Father Donahue was talking about money on Sunday, and it broke me, Polly. He said the Bible talks about what a man gets if he gains the world but loses his soul. Her voice trailed off for a minute, and I could hear her sniffling. I don't want you losing your soul, Polly. Not on my account. You're getting more money than a fella can make working at a bodega. However you're making it, it's gotta stop, baby. You're a good boy in your heart, taking care of me how you have, but it's done. I love you, my son. I listened to the voicemail over and over, sitting in the ratty chair in my room. What does a man get if he gains the world but loses his soul? I couldn't get those words out of my head. Ma was speaking metaphorically, but she didn't know that she had hit the nail right on the head. I hadn't made a deal with the devil, but I had made a deal with something just like him, and it was eating me alive. I don't want to do this anymore, I said, rolling the lockpick between my thumb and forefinger. I gotta be done with this. I want to get rid of you. Mr. Haville, the voice sounded for the first time in months. Have I not done everything you've asked? Why would you want to get rid of something that has benefited you so greatly? I know that I'm near the end, I said, and waited for the voice to respond. It remained silent. It may not be the next time or the time after, but this is almost done. You've almost taken everything in me. I feel hollow, almost like I'm not even here anymore. I've got to get rid of you. I should have a long time ago. The room was quiet for a long moment, and I continued to roll the pick in my hand, the rough grooves of the grip sliding over my calloused fingers. My joints ached and my breathing was labored and rattling. If you had, what would have become of your mother? I don't know, but she wouldn't have wanted this for me. Well, she wouldn't want to die either, Mr. Haville. Destitute and alone, her only son refuses to visit. I can make her sick again. My heart jumped and I nearly dropped the metal pick. Sweat began to bead on my forehead and I felt sick to my stomach. You made her sick, I stammered. No, not the first time, but it is not out of the question that I could, Mr. Haville. I have been so very close to freeing myself from this tool, and I'm afraid that if I cannot complete the ritual with you, I will punish you before I am passed on to another. My mind reeled and I thought that I was going to pass out. One more use of the pick and you will be my new vessel, and I will not give that up lightly. It will be your life or that of your mother. Make your choice. I sat for a moment, staring into the dark, pulse thundering and feeling the spike on the end of the pick, pressing gently against my skin. What if there is a third option? I asked. You have my attention. It's true. I wasn't a smart criminal, but that doesn't mean that I didn't know a few tricks of the trade. Halloween was one of the few times of the year that you can walk around the big city wearing a mask, and people don't think that you're up to something. A couple of cheap masks in a backpack, and a man could change them every few hours, go unnoticed, especially if you were following someone. I picked a target to pass the pick off to in the late morning of Halloween. It wasn't even lunch and the city was teeming with kids and adults, dressed up like monsters and ghosts. I fit right in with my red devil mask and nondescript clothing. There was a skeleton and mummy mask in my backpack to swap out so my target didn't get too wise. I watched him all day at a distance. He left his apartment just before noon, stopped by a little corner store for a pack of cigarettes, spent a few hours reading a book in the park. It wasn't until around dark that he finally settled down for a bit, dropped into a dingy watering hole called O'Malley's. It was the shabby kind of place that a man only went into if he planned to dip his head into a well drink until closing time. Having watched him have a round or two through the window before I headed back to his apartment building, he would be in there for a few hours at least, BSing and knocking back cheap liquor. I knew the type because I was the type. Before prison anyway. The briefcase knocked against my leg as I walked down the street. You best hope this works, Mr. Haville, or the disguise you wear may become a bit more realistic. I sat in the dark stairwell for hours, chain-smoking cigarettes and staring at the briefcase across the hall. It had black hand-stitched leather with chrome fixtures. The dull yellow light on the ceiling reflected off the latches that stood at attention, unengaged. I had been watching it for nearly 4 hours, sitting untouched in the dim glow. Had to wait for the last of the trick-or-treaters to clear the halls before I sat it by the door. I didn't want one of them getting too curious if I left it sitting out. As I fished the last crumpled cigarette from my pack and struck my Zippo, I finally heard footsteps at the other end of the hall. Afraid that I would startle the person from the darkness, I licked my thumb and used it to stub out the end of my freshly lit smoke. The thud of footfalls echoed through the hall as they grew closer until I could finally see the silhouette of a man stopped a few feet from the briefcase. "Well, what do we have here, eh?" he said, head scanning from side to side. "Someone's gone and left their kid here in the hall. Any takers?" He turned and looked behind him, still darting his head wildly, looking for any potential owners in sight. His hands rested on his hips, and as he turned back, staring down at the case again. Smiling, he leaned over and slid his fingers through the handle, thumb resting on the end. "Ah, God!" he screamed, dropping the briefcase carelessly to the ground and sticking his thumb in his mouth for a moment. "What the heck?" I lit the end of my stubbed cigarette again. The light from the Zippo illuminated my face for just a moment, and the man looked up at me, his salt and pepper hair reflecting shallow light from the bulb overhead. His eyes grew large as our gazes connected. A thin, weak smile stretched across my face. "Polly?" the man asked. "Polly Haville, what are you doing here, my man? Haven't seen you in a bit. You doing okay?" I didn't answer him, just pulled in deep drags of the cigarette and let the smoke drift into the hallway, filling the space between us. Tony Tennant, my old friend, shifted nervously in place, bleeding thumb still held near his face. He looked down at the briefcase and back to his thumb before returning his gaze to me. "Polly," he muttered. "Hey man, come on, you didn't." "No, what was in that handle?" "The pick, Tony," I said between drags. My eyes drifted down to the briefcase, a faint glint of light shining on the pick that I had carefully hidden in the handle. "It just had to taste your blood one more time now, didn't it? That's why you had passed it on to me. Cursed me. Your friend. I was your friend, Tony, but you tried to stick me with that. What is it? A demon?" No, he muttered, staggering away from the case. "I got rid of it. You took it. The cops were supposed to find you in that house and send you back upstate. I figured you'd be safe in prison if they took the pick away, and I'd be free from that thing." It was never certain the voice had told me the truth until that moment. Tony had set me up. I was about to respond when Tony's body began to shake violently. He fell to the floor, his head connecting with the worn linoleum, arms and legs writhing in pain. Loud wet coughs and grunts spilled from his mouth as he flailed wildly, slamming into the wall and turning onto his face. Tony fell still and silence filled the hallway. I stood from the steps and walked carefully toward Tony. Foamy spit and blood were smeared across the floor. I nudged him with my foot, but he didn't move. His body was completely still, not even a rise or fall of breath. Turning him over with my shoe, he fell onto his back with a thud, glassy eyes staring at the ceiling. I waited. For what? I don't have a clue. Anything other than for him to lie there lifelessly. Coming in contact with the lockpick a final time would be enough to take the last of Tony's soul, but I figured the voice would take over his body. I half expected for him to stand up and attack me, or turn into some nightmarish creature. Kneeling down, I reached for the briefcase to pull the pick free and wipe it down off my prints, but I saw that it had turned to ash. It scattered from the hole in the handle onto the floor, mixing with drops of Tony's blood. Looking over my shoulder at the lifeless body, I shook my head. Things have more or less gotten back to normal over the last few months. I watched the news every night for a month, waiting for a reporter to mention a cop finding Tony's body in the hallway, but no news ever came. I kept myself busy with work, actually putting in a full week of work at the corner store. I even worked a few hours of overtime now and again to help out Mr. and Mrs. D. Ma and I eat dinner together once a week. I missed out on a lot of time with her, and the cancer could have been the end. She nags me about how bad I look, but I tell her that not everybody can age as gracefully as she has. She laughs, but there's always a look of concern in her eye. Ma knows that I'm full of it, just like my old man, but she lets it go. I never got all my strength back. Most days are a struggle. Even in my mid-30s, I feel like some codger. My knees ache and I get tired quickly, and I spend most of my free time sleeping in front of the television. It's decent though. I'm legitimate these days, keeping my nose clean. For as bad as my body feels, my conscience has never felt better. Earlier this morning, I was working the counter at the bodega. It had been quiet, so I leaned against the wall and pulled an old Louis L'Amour paperback out of my pocket to pass the day. The bell jingled and I shouted a hello, but no one responded. Looking up from my paperback, I saw a stooped man standing in the doorway. He was tall, about 6.5 feet. His greased salt and pepper hair reflected the morning sun, and a shark's grin ran across his face. His eyes, nearly black, locked with mine as he waved. The paperback tumbled from my hands and I rubbed my eyes. When I opened them, he was gone. A chime from the bell rattled again as the front door slammed back into place. My palm ached softly and I massaged it with my fingers. Tony had been there for just a minute and was gone just as quickly. My old man told me that our family didn't have no guardian angels, and he was right. We have something worse. Today's episode is sponsored by HelloFresh. Fall is definitely one of my favorite times of the year, but with that comes a busy schedule which can make it difficult to find time to make healthy and filling meals for dinner. Luckily, HelloFresh has over 40 recipes to choose from weekly, so there's always something delicious to try. HelloFresh offers in-season ingredients so you'll taste all the freshness of fall in every bite of their chef-crafted recipes. Produce travels from the farm to your door for peak ripeness that you can taste. My favorite fall recipe so far has been the autumn spiced pork chops, with roasted Brussels sprouts and honey butter sweet potatoes. It was super easy to make with step-by-step instructions and it tasted amazing. I'll definitely be going back to this one. To get started, go to hellofresh.com/50mrcreeps and use code 50mrcreeps for 50% off plus free shipping. Again, that's hellofresh.com/50mrcreeps. Use code 50mrcreeps for 50% off plus free shipping. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit.